Have you ever wondered why the men who actually control real money are never the ones you see on magazine covers? Never the ones showing off on screens? Never the ones begging for attention from crowds that secretly hate them? And why every empire that rises with so much noise eventually gets torn down just as loudly by the same people who were cheering for it? Real power has always understood one rule that broke people refuse to learn: that being visible is dangerous, that attention is a cost, and that the people who stand in the spotlight become targets way before they ever become legends. Because you cannot destroy what you cannot see, you cannot steal what you cannot find, and you cannot plot against someone who is just a rumor with no face. Regular people are taught to believe that success must announce itself, that greatness needs an audience, that wealth must shine in public to be real. But this whole belief is actually a trap set by the people who already run everything. Because the more visible you are, the more predictable you become. And the more predictable you are, the easier it is to take you down. Through taxes, through rules, through envy, through lawsuits, through social pressure, until what once looked like a fortress turns into a cage of expectations. And you find yourself working not for your own growth, but for the comfort of people who just sit and watch you. People do not hate power. They hate seeing someone else hold it. And this is exactly why every famous rich guy eventually becomes the bad guy in the public story. Because the crowd forgives being broke, but never forgives being dominant. And once you are seen as having more than your share, the knives start sharpening in the minds of government, guys, journalists, and even your own neighbors who smile to your face while quietly hating your position. And that hate is always what starts the destruction, because people who feel small will always try to pull down the people who stand tall. A smart person learns to wear masks, to let other people take the stage while he holds the strings, to let loud guys fight over attention while he moves quietly behind the scenes where the real decisions actually happen. Because applause is not power, and being recognized is not safety. Every man who trades his privacy for praise will eventually discover he sold his freedom just for a quick feeling of importance, while the person nobody notices keeps quietly stacking information and assets that the crowd can never even reach. This is why history books talk about kings and generals, but the real control sits with bankers, advisors, and quiet families whose names you never hear in everyday conversation. Because the throne attracts arrows, but the treasury stays safe when it is kept in the dark. And the person who truly gets this does not rush to show off his wins. He lets others believe they are ahead, while he quietly counts what they cannot see. Because showing off is for fools, and real results are for people who know how to wait. If you want to get rich, you have to drop the childish need to be admired, because admiration is expensive. It demands that you explain yourself, justify yourself, and eventually give in to what others expect from you. But staying invisible lets you move without friction, build without being noticed, create problems for your enemies before they even know you exist. This is the real advantage of the fox, who slips past every trap, not through strength, but by never walking where the hunters are looking. People judge more by what they see than by what is actually real. So the art of becoming invisible is not about hiding in poverty, but about hiding in plain sight. Letting others underestimate you while you quietly build wealth and influence that does not need their approval, because the moment they start praising you is the moment they start claiming you. And the moment they claim you is the moment you are no longer free to do what needs to be done. You become a servant of appearances, forced to keep up an image that stopped working for you a long time ago. Because the crowd does not love you for what you actually do. They love what you represent to their own hopes and frustrations. And the second you step out of that image, they will turn on you in a way that feels righteous, but is really just hurt expectations. Which is why the invisible person is always safer than the celebrated one, because he has no image to protect and no lie to keep alive. Every system of power, whether in politics or money, is built on watching and controlling people. The more visible you become, the more completely you get pulled into those systems, labeled, sorted, regulated, taxed, and mentally pushed into becoming easy to predict and easy to control, while the person who stays unknown slips right through the cracks, operating in spaces where the rules are loose and nobody is really watching. And that is exactly where real wealth gets built, long before it is ever shown to anyone. Understand this clearly. People do not rise by being good. They rise by being useful, and they fall by being seen as a threat. So if you keep showing off your success, you are basically telling everyone that you are both a target for their hate and a rival to the people who already own the game. And rivals are never tolerated for long, because power is not shared by the people who have it. It is defended, protected, and held on to with the same animal instinct that any creature uses to guard its ground. This is why the people who survive at the top are the ones who master how they appear, who let others believe they are smaller, weaker, or less important than they really are. Because underestimated power is the most dangerous kind, and it is way easier to move from the shadows than from a bright stage where every single move is watched, criticized, and predicted by enemies pretending to be fans until they find an opening. You have to learn to separate your real moves from your public face. Let the world deal with a harmless front, while your real self is out there, quietly building, acquiring, and growing in total silence. Because the front absorbs all the hate, the attention, and the noise, while the real you stays focused on what actually matters. Not being liked, but being in position. Not being celebrated, but being safe. People think being open and transparent is a good thing, but being open is really just being exposed with a nice word on top. Because when everyone knows your moves, your money, and your plans, you have already given up the advantage that lets you act without someone getting in your way. And interference is the real enemy of wealth. It slows everything down, complicates every decision, and takes a cut of every move until the opportunity is gone and in the hands of someone who was never silly enough to announce themselves. So you have to get comfortable with people misunderstanding you, even writing you off, because staying under the radar gives you the freedom to operate beyond the reach of gossip rules and social pressure. And in that freedom is where fortunes get quietly built, not through dramatic moves, but through patient, slow accumulation, through deals nobody hears about, through positions nobody notices, until they have already grown into something too big to challenge without things getting messy. People who chase the spotlight believe that fame creates power, but fame only creates exposure, and exposure is the first step toward being controlled. Because once your name becomes a symbol, you no longer belong to yourself. You belong to the stories other people tell about you, and stories are weapons used to push you into roles that serve the people spreading them, while the invisible person stays free to shift and adapt and move exactly when and how it is needed. Because need not morality is what runs every serious game of wealth. And those who let themselves get tied down by what the public expects will always be outplayed by those who understand that rules only apply firmly to the people who can be seen, while the unseen move freely, bending and using every gap that visibility leaves open. Which is why the most dangerous players in any game are never the ones giving speeches, but the ones sitting quietly in the corner and doing the math. When you are invisible, you do not have to explain yourself to anyone, and explaining yourself is weakness because it opens the door to debate. Debate opens the door to delay, and delay kills opportunity. The person who owes nobody an explanation can move fast and hit hard, grabbing assets, relationships, and positions long before the rest of the world even realizes something changed. And by the time they notice, it is already too late to stop him without hurting themselves in the process. People are taught to believe that wealth comes from effort that can be seen, from work that can be admired, from stories that can be posted online. But in reality, wealth comes from controlling things nobody sees, from owning the game instead of just playing in it. And games are built quietly through deals, through leverage, through influence over decision makers who never go on television because they have no reason to. Their power shows up in what happens, not in what gets talked about. The more eyes on you, the more hands reaching toward you, demanding a piece, demanding answers, demanding that you explain why you have more than they do. And this is why public success is always followed by public punishment, because people only tolerate the gap between rich and poor when it stays hidden. The moment it gets shown off, they try to fix it through law, through shame, and through force, while the invisible keep building without triggering that reaction. This is not a fault of regular people. It is just how human psychology works. People compare themselves constantly, and comparison creates resentment, and resentment needs a target. So if you want to keep what you build, you have to avoid becoming that target. You have to let others believe their lives are fine, or at least not threatened by yours, while in truth, you are quietly getting yourself to a place far beyond their reach. A king who shows his gold invites thieves, and a man who shows his wealth invites every kind of predator, from tax collectors to lawyers, to fake friends who see money where there used to be loyalty. Because loyalty is really based on usefulness, and when your usefulness is clearly financial, it attracts the people who want to drain it. So the smart ones hide what they have, not out of shame, but because they understand how fast it disappears once people know about it. Staying invisible also gives you the power to watch without being watched, which is the foundation of every real advantage, because you learn who is loyal, who is greedy, who is scared, and who is hungry before any of them have learned a single thing about you. And information is the most valuable thing in any game, but it is only shared freely with people who do not look like a threat, which is why the person everyone underestimates always knows more than the person everyone admires. To be invisible is not to be absent, but to be unreadable, to exist without giving away your intentions, to move without announcing where you are going, and to build without showing your progress. Because the world is not kind to the people who stand out. It is only patient with the ones it doesn't notice. And patience is all a smart player needs to turn small, quiet wins into complete dominance. And dominance is never grabbed in one big dramatic moment, but put together, slowly, through 1,000 small moves that nobody bothers to pay attention to. Because attention is always on the drama, on the chaos, on the loud crashes between big egos and big institutions, while the real shifts of power happen in silence, in rooms with no cameras, in accounts with no names, in agreements written in language too boring for regular people to read, but too precise for anyone to break. The people who announce their goals invite opposition because ambition looks like aggression to anyone who might lose from your success. So the smart ones never declare what they are going for. They let their results show up long after anyone remembers what started it, which is why the most successful fortunes look to the outside world like they came out of nowhere, sudden and impossible to explain, when really they were built patiently in the dark. You have to understand that the public world is not a place of truth, but a battlefield of perception, where every visible person gets either lifted up or torn apart according to stories they cannot control. And stepping into that world means handing your future to forces that do not care about you at all, only about their own need for drama, scandals, and symbols, while the invisible person stays untouched by all of that, free to grow, while everyone else is distracted. Real wealth needs stability. And stability is impossible when strangers are constantly deciding who you are, because your reputation becomes a weapon that rivals and regulators can use against you, twist it into whatever shape they need to justify whatever they want to do. And once your name gets dirty, every door closes at once, regardless of the truth behind the accusations. Which is why the ones who truly protect what they built keep their names out of public conversation. Think about how easily a famous person can be taken apart. How one accusation, one policy change, or one wave of public outrage can wipe out decades of work, while the invisible ones stay protected because they do not depend on approval. They depend on structure, on spread out holdings, on relationships built on shared benefit, not on public loyalty. which makes them far harder to destroy than any celebrity of the news cycle. The crowd does not protect the people who serve it. It uses them. It turns their rise into entertainment and their fall into a lesson. So if you want to be rich rather than famous, you have to fight the urge to be seen as special. Because being seen as special brings both fans and enemies always win in the end, because they run on envy, which is way stronger than gratitude. Staying invisible also lets you change direction when needed, to leave one game and enter another without carrying a bag full of other people's expectations, because being flexible is its own kind of power, and the people locked into one public image cannot change without being called fake, while the unseen change, freely driven only by what makes sense and what works not by needing to look consistent. So the real art of getting rich is not chasing attention, but building mystery, letting others stay uncertain about how big you are, how far your reach goes, and what you are actually planning. Because uncertainty makes people careful, and careful people do not attack you, while being fully known invites challenge. And challenge always costs you something, whether money, energy, or freedom, that no smart person would willingly give up. And every cost you pay because people know who you are is a cost that could have gone toward growing your position if you had stayed unseen. Because the biggest drain on wealth is not losing. It is interference. The constant friction of being managed, judged, and limited by forces that have zero interest in your success and only want to control it for themselves. When government people know your name, they go through your records. When journalists know your face, they go through your past. When the public knows your wealth, they go through your morals. And none of that is neutral. All of it is a weapon designed to get leverage over you, to push you into following their rules, to slow you down until the people operating quietly pass you by without any resistance. The invisible person, by contrast, is a ghost in those systems, too small to bother with, too unknown to target, too hard to define to regulate cleanly. And that hardness to define is his protection. Because systems of control need clear targets, clear lines, and clear stories, all of which disappear when you do not hand them a simple, easy identity to go after. This is why so many real fortunes sit behind layers of companies and trusts and go-betweens, not out of fear, but out of strategy. Because layers create distance, and distance creates safety. While being simple and easy to find invites people to dig through your stuff, whether through taxes, lawsuits, or political pressure, that forces you to pay for things that do not serve you at all. People who show off their wealth think it makes them powerful, but it actually makes them dependent on the protection of the very systems that exist to limit power. Because once you are visible, you have to play by the rules of the people watching you. And those rules are written to protect the ones already at the top, not the ones still climbing. So every dollar you show off becomes a hook that pulls you deeper into their game. A smart person therefore builds quietly, using other people to take the risk, to take the blame, and to attract the attention, while he stays protected behind structures that let him benefit without being present. Because being present creates problems, and problems are what let your enemies hurt you without ever having to face you directly. Even your friends become more dangerous when they know too much about you, because knowing things gives people power over you, and that power always gets used eventually, whether through betrayal or through asking for a bigger cut. So the invisible person only shares what is necessary and never lets anyone see the full picture of what he has or what he is planning. Because keeping people guessing keeps them careful, and careful people are easy to manage. Getting rich is therefore not about collecting things, but about collecting options. Building a position from which you can move, invest, or pull back without getting trapped by reputation deals or public stories. And staying invisible multiplies your options by cutting down on the number of forces that can hold you back. Which is why it is the first thing anyone serious about lasting power has to master. The people who do not get this chase approval, they chase applause. They chase the idea that being known is the same as being safe. And in doing so, they hand themselves over to the mercy of moods markets and angry crowds, while the invisible quietly turn every small, unnoticed win into permanent growth that the world which ignores them is funding without realizing it. And that growth, once it gets going, builds faster than any public success ever could, because it happens in places where the competition is thin and nobody is watching closely. Letting the invisible pick things up at prices the visible can never get, because everyone who is being watched has to pay extra just for the privilege of being seen, whether through taxes, inflated prices, or the never-ending cost of protecting their image. There is a reason the biggest movements of wealth happen during moments of chaos, when everyone's attention is locked on fear and drama, while the people who quietly prepared step forward to buy, to claim to lock things in, because they are not frozen by the need to justify themselves. And that freedom to act without explaining is what separates the winners from the losers in every financial crash. The visible panic, the invisible get into position. And this is not cruel, it is just real. Because money does not reward being good, it rewards being ready. And readiness is built when nobody is watching. When you are collecting cash connections and resources, while everyone else is busy performing their success, not realizing that the very performance they are putting on is being studied by quieter minds who are learning exactly where the weakness is. If you want to be rich, you have to teach yourself to value being quiet over being seen. Because every time you show something, you leave a trail, and every trail can be followed, taxed, sued, or sabotaged. But staying quiet leaves nothing but guesses, and guesses cannot be regulated, only assumed, which puts you in a position to operate beyond the reach of rules that trap the people who need to be seen. This is why so many famous people who built something real eventually get squeezed by the same systems they once worked around. Forced to go public, forced to follow rules, forced into structures that make them answer not to their own plan, but to the expectations of investors, voters, or customers who do not care at all about the long game that built the wealth in the first place. The invisible, by contrast, can walk in and out of any game without a big announcement, moving their resources from one place to another as things change, because nobody is tracking them closely enough to get in the way. And that ability to move freely is the real meaning of power. The ability to change course without asking permission, to move resources without explaining, to cut losses without being called a traitor. People talk about freedom like it is a feeling, but in reality, freedom is a practical thing. The absence of things that stop you from doing what is best for you. And being visible piles on restrictions while being invisible removes them, which is why the people who truly value their independence learn to stay below the level where rules get enforced seriously. As long as you are a recognizable name, you are governed by the rules that come with that name. But when you become a web of structures and ownerships that nobody can easily map out, you move beyond personal control into a space where you negotiate from real strength, because the people who cannot fully see you cannot fully own you. In this way, invisibility is not weakness, but the highest form of protection. A cover that lets you move through systems designed to use the visible against themselves. And it is under that cover that the most lasting fortunes in history have been built. Not through big, bold moves, but through quiet, steady building that nobody thought was worth stopping until it was already too big to touch. If you made it this far, it is because some part of you already knows this is true. Visibility brings envy, competition, and interference. The people who build real wealth do it quietly, away from eyes that want to copy, sabotage, or drain what they are putting together. Now tell me in the comments if you are ready to stop announcing your moves and start building in silence. If this message hit you and made sense, write in the comments, "I build unseen." Let us see how many people here are truly ready to grow without being hunted. And do not forget, keep watching the next video. It is important. Much more than you think. See you there.